Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. I can't believe this is my last video for 2023. It's another year on BookTube, and yeah, it's just been a very quick year. I ended this year with reading 58 books. My goal was to read 52 books, which is averaging one book a week. So I feel very grateful that I'm able to have the time and access to read the books that I want to read, because I know not everyone has that luxury. And yeah, I'm just going to share my top 8 books of 2023. Unfortunately, there weren't top 10 books this year. I didn't want to just fill 10 books just because I wanted a top 10 list. So I just wanted to be honest, and I only had 8 books that I really wanted to rave about that I read this year. I do want to say, surprisingly, that not all 8 books were 5 out of 5, but I'll share a reason why I gave these books a top list of the year and why they resonate with me. And I'll share them in in the order I read them this year. And then also, if you're watching this video, I always will appreciate if you hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and comment down below if any of my top books for this year were your top books, and also share down below what was your top #1 book of this past year that you highly recommend to people if they only have the time to read one book. The first book I read this year was Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This I read earlier this year, and it was so early that I actually felt like I read it like a longer time ago. But this book, I didn't give it a 5 out of 5, but why I gave it a top 8 spot for 2023 is it's one of those seldom books that kind of just stick around with you and you kind of think about it, and it's just an interesting concept. So the premise of this book is Clara is a AF, artificial friend, or in our world, artificial intelligence, I guess, and she sits at the store window with her fellow AFs, and she observes the world, and she takes nourishment from the sun, hence the title Clara and the Sun. One day, Josie comes around and she purchases Clara as her AF, and the book is told from a perspective of Clara, the AF, or artificial intelligence, and it's just really cool to observe our real world from her perspective, because she's an unreliable narrator. She's coming to learn the world as she comes to learn it, and I just love seeing Claire's observations on human connections and interactions, and how even though she is artificial, she kind of in the book, her development kind of believes in this idea of spiritualism, and it's super interesting because I feel like spiritualism is a very like human thing. So it kind of blurs the line of like Clara developing consciousness, developing this belief in spiritualism, and how that affects her as a artificial friend. This book was just the plot was okay for me, to be honest, but I just really, it's one of those books that just kind of stay with me after. I know with our current world and the idea of AI becoming more rampant in our lives, it's just super interesting book to read, and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read that really stuck with me was When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi and Abraham Verghese. And this was a 5 out of 5. I cried when it ended. It's definitely a short, quick read, and it's just very raw and emotional. So this book is written by Paul, and I mean, it's not spoiling the book, but he basically writes. He's a doctor, and he basically writes about how at the age of 36, he's diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, has a very short time to live, and it's just an interesting take on the book, on the idea of not just being diagnosed with cancer, but being a doctor in the medical field, and just him sharing that, for a lot of his career, he was always given the bad news of his patients being diagnosed with cancer, but now he is the patient, and he talks about his experience, and it's just really sad. Talks about how the diagnosis has an impact on his career, his marriage, his future goals. It's definitely a very like reflective book on my own life, and how my views of death and illness and cancer. And I think this book is definitely very, I think, important for people to read. As I said, it's not a very long book. I don't want to say it's heavy because it's not heavy, but it is a heavy subject matter. I just think it's a book about a human who had lived in our world, and he shared his story, and I think it's a story worth reading. The next book that you might be surprised as a top 8 for me is Plot Twist by Bethany Turner. This is a contemporary romance, so as you know, it's like my least favorite genre, but I really enjoyed this one. Basically, we meet Olivia, who is 30, living in Hollywood, and she is an aspiring screenwriter. And she goes to a coffee shop one day and runs into an aspiring actor. And they vow into 10 years to meet back at his coffee shop to see where they are in life. And this book is interesting because, it's called Plot Twist, so there's so many plot twists. I literally didn't see any of them coming. I didn't know where the book was going to go. And there's literally a plot twist up until, like, I don't know, the last, like, few pages. And this book is just interesting because the premise is these two people, the aspiring screenwriter and aspiring actor, meet on February 4th, 2003, I believe. And this book is set over 10 years because they decide to meet again in 10 years. But the book only takes place every year on February 4th each year. So you don't know what happens the rest of the year, but you meet the characters on that date every year up to 10 years later in 2013. And why I gave this book a top 8 rating is because I really enjoyed it, lots of plot twists, and it also made me realize the subgenre of contemporary romance I like. As you know, I don't like smut, I don't really enjoy it, and in this book, it is actually categorized as Christian romance, not because the characters are religious or share any religious beliefs, but because the level of smut is, I believe they only kissed at the end. I actually don't know if they kissed. I think it alluded to them kissing. There's like no descriptions or adjectives of them kissing. And I realized I really enjoy that subgenre of romance. Even though I'm not religious, I really appreciate that this is a subgenre because I enjoyed all the plot leading up to it instead of having to read the smut to get through the characters. And then I had a bit of a slog throughout the rest of the year. I would say like the books I just mentioned now were in the spring, and then I had a slog, and then in the summer it was really hard for me to read, and in the fall I had back to back to back great reads. So one of the first books I read through my book club, so grateful that this person recommended it, was Big Swiss by Jen Began. This book was so unhinged and chaotic and unpredictable. Shock value, I gave this book a 5. I think you should not read the premise before you read it and just get into it. Basically, it's about a woman who is a therapist, and these women's lives get entangled, and it's just super juicy. I don't want to talk about it too much because it was just so chaotic and so worth reading. That's all I'm going to say about this book. The next book I read this book I read earlier in the year, but my order was kind of messed up. This book I picked up randomly in the library when I was visiting my friend down in Kansas, and this book I read, basically, it's kind of a meteor book, but it was so good I read it during my plane ride back to Calgary. It's Peach Blossom Spain by Melissa Fu, and this book was a 5 out of 5. Again, as you know, my favorite genre is historical fiction, multi-generational sagas, and this book is it. So it's set in China in 1940s to 2000s, and basically we follow a mother and son who have to flee where they live in China to other parts of China, Taiwan, etc. Ultimately, the son makes it to America, and then he settles down, gets married, has his child, who's a daughter, and she grows up in the U.S. and is curious about where her family came from. And this book was just so beautiful, so intertwined. There's a bit of folklore into it, and I just freaking loved it. It was just a great book. It just reminds you that people do what it takes to survive. They always look forward, you don't look back. And with every curse in life, there's also a blessing. So it's just really important to have a good head on your shoulders and good perspective, and just, live and enjoy all the nuances of life, I guess. And okay, now I'm jumping back and forth because my next book that was also a top 8 for me, but I read later in the year, but it's kind of like the same genre, is Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeleine Tien. This is also historical fiction. The author is from Vancouver, so some of the book is set in Vancouver, which is where I was born and raised. And this book also set in China during 1940s to basically 1990s present day. So also kind of covering, not kind of, is covering the same historical eras in China, but just different perspectives and different classes, and I just freaking love it. I don't know if I'm just maybe enjoying it more because I'm ethnically Chinese. I thought that it may be because I'm Chinese, but the thing is that I'm not like, I don't really know a lot about my family history, and my family doesn't really talk about it, so I don't know why I have an affinity towards this like historical fiction, but I just loved it. It basically talks about the Great Leap Forward all the way to the culture and the Cultural Revolution, all the way to Tiananmen Square in 1989, and it covers the story of two young men who fall on two different sides of the revolution and just following their growth and their journey together and apart, and how they'll always think of each other even though they fall very differently politically. It's just a great book. Really recommend it. Please read it. I do want to say that this year I seem to be on an Asian women author train, just by chance. So I already mentioned Melissa Fu and Madeline Tien, which were two freaking amazing books of historical fiction set in China. My next book was The Leavers by Lisa Ko. This book was great, not set in China primarily, it's actually set in America. And this is just a beautiful but also really sad book, but also just really freaking great to read. I forgot how it came across my radar, but it's been on my TBR for a few years. And when I went to the library, it was there, so I just picked it up. And this book was really good because it talks about, you know, being raised by a Chinese mom, but then being put up for adoption and being raised by a white family, and then being tied to your birth roots, losing the culture that you were born in, but then also reconciling with that later on. This book was really great because it showcases the idea that people have more than one identity of being a mom, a son, or an uncle, and people are multifaceted. And later on in the book, the son actually goes back to China to reconcile with his mom, and I just really loved it because it showed a very different perspective of what China's like in modern times, and it was really great. The next book that was great for me, also by Asian female author, was Yellow Face by R.F. Kwan. This book, sorry, I laugh because this book has no historical fiction in it. It was just also very unhinged and chaotic. Kind of reminded me of Big Swiss, but basically we have this author who, not author off crime, in the book there's an author who's white, and she's friends or frenemies with an Asian author. And not a spoiler alert, because it happens pretty early on, is the Asian author chokes and dies, and then the yellow author has the Asian author's manuscripts and then publishes the book as if it's her works, as is her work, and also changes her name so her name sounds kind of like possibly Asian even though she's white. And that's why this book is called Yellow Face, because basically it's about a white author taking an Asian author's work and identity and making a lot of freaking money. And this book was just so funny because it's kind of a commentary on BookTube, on Goodreads, about the publishing industry and just our society. So it was just really great. Again, no idea where this book was going the whole time, and I just really enjoyed it. That's my top 8 books of 2023. Let me know what you thought down below of these books if you read them, and also comment down below your top book. I can't believe this is the end of the year. I always appreciate you guys watching my videos, and I'll see you guys in the new year. Bye!